People, welcome back to See-Through Panel, a comic book discussion podcast. My name is Cole Harvey. I am here with Fahed Rahman.
Hello, everyone.
Today we're going to be talking about our top 5 classic manga. I believe our only specification for this was it had to begin the run for 2000. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah.
So I may have cheated a little bit. I think almost all of mine end in the 2000s, but at least they begin in the 90s or the 80s.
Yes.
So
yeah. And I've slightly cheated on one of my ones as well. So, do you want to go first with kind of like your first pick?
Yes, I'll get this one out of the way. So, my first one was Akira by Katsuhiro Otomo.
Yeah.
Yep, it's got to be on there. It's probably on like all the top 5 lists.
Yeah.
Started in '82. I mean, it's Akira. I don't have to say a lot about this one. Everyone knows what Akira is. It's a great, epic sci-fi tale.
Yeah. I think it should be kind of worth saying, like, I think a lot of people would only be familiar about Akira through the anime, and the manga is a much different beast. I think it's the anime kind of captured some of this plot and the spirit of the manga. Like, the manga is a much meatier meal. There's a lot more going on in there, and there's a lot more kind of complex interactions between various different groups of characters, especially kind of like the Resistance Underground element, which I think kind of gets sidelined in the anime a little bit. So yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I watched the anime first, and then got all of the 6 volumes, I think, because they're
6 or 7 or maybe 8 volumes. So yeah, the kind of like massive meaty books. Yeah, so
so it probably comes out to a couple thousand pages, and
easily, yeah.
And the movie definitely skips a lot of like the smaller scale character interaction. It skips some of the subplots. I think it ends, if I'm remembering correctly, it ends sooner than the manga does and in a different way.
Yes.
So yeah, I definitely prefer the manga over the movie, but one is going to take you a little bit longer to absorb.
A lot longer, and it's one of those books where I wouldn't kind of suggest that you read tome after, like, each volume one after the other. You kind of need to take your time with it and digest it, and then kind of like maybe read one a month, I would say, rather than trying to just kind of like blast your way through it. I did apparently there is going to be like a new adaptation of it. I'm not talking about
action.
Not the live action one. Apparently there are plans afoot to make a new anime, but as a TV series, kind of like as a maybe getting a little bit more into those subplots that the original anime film had to skip, which I think is kind of quite exciting as well.
Well, Otomo directed the first one because I believe it was before he'd even finished the story, which is why they have separate plots. So I assume he's probably not on board, but I'm pretty sure he's still alive and kicking and writing.
I think he is on board in like a producer capacity at some points. It's been produced in Japan. So that's kind of like my first choice on my list as well.
Yeah.
Where have I put my notes? Okay, professional as well. So the next one on my list, so Akira is the first one on my list. The next one on my list is, so my next one is Ranma 1/2 by Rumiki Takahashi, and it's basically it's kind of a gender swap comedy martial arts epic, and it revolves around a teenage boy called Ranma Saitama, who has trained in martial arts since an early age, and him and his father go to these like mystical mountains, and as a result of an accident they fall into a pool during this kind of like training journey on this mystical mountain. And so as a result of that, anytime he's splashed with cold water, he changes genders and turns into a girl. And his father, as a result of like falling into this pool, has permanently turned into a giant panda. So like it's kind of like it's full of like really fantastic action sequences, lots of like comedy based around Ranma's love life and kind of various girlfriends and fiancés he had, and playing a lot with like gender stereotypes and that sort of thing. It's been absolutely. I read this when I was like a teenager, so my memory's a little bit faded of like, the actual details of the plot, but I do have very fond memories of reading it and kind of laughing out loud and just thinking, this is so weird. This is such a weird book, but yeah,
Sounds crazy.
it's absolutely fantastic, and it's probably something that I didn't watch any of the anime or TV series or anything like that. So just kind of thinking about what I'd put on this list, this is something I probably want to revisit at some point. But yeah, it's sex comedy / martial arts action adventure story. So yeah.
So does the dad also change into a panda when splashed with water, or is he a
If
panda
I
all the time?
if I remember correctly, he is a panda all the time.
Okay, that
Because
sounds insane.
I think he fell into the pool of water for a longer period of time. So I think like it's kind of a little bit like One Piece, where kind of each bean, where each kind of like cursed fruit gives you a different magic power. I think each
Yeah.
pool had a different kind of like cursed effects
Okay.
on it. So yeah, so like Ranma, when he gets splashed with cold water, turns into a girl, but when he takes a hot shower, he turns back into a boy. So it's kind of like, and the entire manga series is about him dealing with his love life, being challenged by various other martial arts rivals, and looking for a cure for this curse that he's dealing with as well.
That sounds pretty cool. I had never even heard of that one.
Yeah.
My second, these are in no particular order.
Yeah.
Would be Blam or Blame.
Okay.
I think it's spelled Blame, but I think it's said Blam, like a gunshot.
Okay.
It's by Tsutomu Nihei. I'm terrible at pronouncing names. It is a like far, far future sci-fi. I might even say a little bit of horror. It follows Killy, who is a kind of a solo traveling, I guess adventure is the word, and he's basically traveling. The whole thing is him traveling through this giant mega structure that is being created by robots, and I think at some point they say it goes from like close to the sun to like the moon's Earth, like it's that big, and it's a big circle of that size, or the Earth's moon. I think I said it backwards earlier. So it's like a giant, multiple planet wide building that he's trying to travel through to get to basically a MacGuffin. It's almost got no words. Nihei is in a very early stage of his career where he uses a lot of heavy blacks. If you look at some of his stuff now, Knights of Sidonia, he does now.
Oh, I think you've mentioned this before.
Yeah, this is one of my all-time favorite. It probably have, yeah. And so he uses a lot of heavy blacks. Now he like almost uses no blacks, or at least for a while he did there. And yeah, the art's incredible, and the story is really complicated and weird and incomprehensible at times, but you get it at the end, and it definitely rewards a reread. It's like 6 big. It's probably the same length as Akira, almost the same. And this came out in 97. So just real close to that rule that we made. But yeah, this is one I would recommend to any manga fan because I don't see it talked a lot about, but it's probably tied for my top manga of all time.
Okay, that's something I probably should check out because it's kind of the second time you've mentioned it. So it's definitely something I'll probably check out as well. My next pick is Blackjack by Osamu Tezuka. So I think Osamu Tezuka is kind of one of the founding pillars of modern day manga in Japan, and Blackjack. It kind of deals with the adventures of this kind of rogue doctor named Blackjack, and he's kind of styled as this kind of medical mercenary that doesn't have like a license to practice medicine or perform surgery, and shadowy figure, and it's not like there's an overarching story. Kind of all the self-contained stories and the kind of like morality tales. So he does a lot of medical services for free for poor people that can't afford it, but when rich people hire him out, he'll kind of accept the challenge of that as well. So it's a very intriguing look at kind of like morality tales as told through the eyes of a rogue surgeon, basically. So and it's kind of nice because you can kind of read each book as a self-contained thing. It's not one of those ones where if I have to start it from the beginning. That's not necessary. You can kind of like jump in through the middle, absorb the stories that way. So for me, it's a bit of a strange comparison, but it's a little bit like Law and Order in terms of like you can just like pick up a volume and just read it and just have a
Yeah.
self-contained story that way. So yeah,
Yeah, Tezuka's. There's nothing much to say about Tezuka, but I haven't read. He's got like all these classics like Buddha and Astro Boy and Blackjack and stuff,
yeah,
and I have not read one of them. I need to
yeah.
get on that.
I mean, that's kind of, I was kind of racking my brains about kind of manga that I'd read, and there's so many like classical, popular manga that I've just not touched on. So I think we maybe need to maybe start tackling some of those. I mean, I hear so many great things about, so many of these manga series that I've just not touched at all. So yeah,
Yeah, there's just so much. I mean, it's like when you jump into any culture's
yeah,
mediums of art, like when you go to comics, you realize like there's just a million things you haven't seen, and you'll
yeah,
never see all of it. So
yes, yeah,
my next one I've definitely talked about before, but I won't stop. It is Blade of the Immortal, and it is tied for probably my favorite with Blame. It's kind of a dark fantasy set in, I think it's the Edo era of Japan. It's written and drawn by Hiroki Samura. It is basically the tale of a killer named Manji who has been essentially cursed with being nearly immortal. He can regenerate limbs, or sorry, he can put his limbs back on. He can survive, getting stabbed through the heart. And he is on a quest to assist this young girl, and kind of it's all about morality. It's got some of the most interesting characters I've seen in a manga, most well developed, consistent characters. Haruki Samura is an awesome writer, and he's an even better artist. And this stuff is like top tier manga for me. It's violent, it's funny, it's got, I guess, a little bit of romance, and it's like a sprawling adventure that goes for. I have 10 omnibus versions, so probably
okay,
like 4 volumes longer than Akira or so.
yeah. So that's kind of like a big beast to tackle,
I
really.
think I read it over the course of like a year and a half. Yeah.
Yeah. So this was my younger brother's favorite manga. Kind of when we were kind of growing up, he read the not trade paperbacks, kind of like the volumes, kind of like vociferously. And whenever I go into his room, kind of I'd see these open pages of kind of like because like the main character, his powers kind of like it's powered by worms, kind
Yeah,
of inside his
bloodworms.
body, kind of like that stitch him back together. So kind of very viscerally violent action scenes. And yeah, so it kind of reminded me a little bit of that vibe of kind of like what Wolverine would have been if he was like a Japanese samurai. Well,
Yeah.
he is a samurai, isn't he, sort of? But yeah, that kind of like that sort of like super healing power
Yeah, but it's
as well.
very grounded, which is
Yeah,
weird because yeah, he's got like he is almost Wolverine. I've never made that comparison, but it
yeah,
seems obvious. Yeah, and
yes,
the one more interesting thing you reminded me of the violence. He does a thing called like he stops doing it, but near the beginning, like the first half, he does like death murals. So whenever there's like a big story beat that involves someone dying, he like does a completely different style and like shapes it in like a mural layout. It's really really beautiful.
I mean, I do remember kind of the art being absolutely like, drop dead gorgeous. So yeah, that's another fantastic pick, and probably something I do have access to it. I think my local library does have kind of like quite a few of the trade paperbacks. So it's probably something I should, and I think it's available on the app as well. So I probably should check that one out as well. So my next one is another kind of like hard hitting pillar of the classical manga text is Nausicaa of the Valley of the Winds by Hayao Miyazaki.
That's my next one.
Yeah, so I read this again as like a teenager, and it tells the story of Nausicaa, a princess in a kind of small kingdom in post-apocalyptic Earth, and kind of there's this toxic miasma that's covered the land, and there's kind of these warring kingdoms that are trying to survive during this kind of like period of environmental disaster, and kind of like the survival of humankind is under threat. And it's very much a environmental fable, kind of about it covers a lot of like heavy themes about kind of like environmental disaster, the nature of war, and the corrupting influence of power, loyalty, and treachery, and all those sorts of things. And again, people might be more familiar with the anime, anime adaptation. I'm the anime adaptation's fine, but it's unlike Akira, I can kind of see why the manga and the anime are kind of held in equal esteem. I don't think the anime adaptation of Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind touches the manga at all. I
No,
think
and
like
I love it, but
yeah,
it doesn't.
yeah, kind of like it's there are ideas that presented and images and panels presented in the manga that still remain with me today, and kind of like when I do my creative writing, there's kind of like, well, I'm going to steal that idea but I'm going to kind of remix it a little bit. So I out of all the the books that we're kind of talking about today, kind of this is the one that I really wish had received kind of a longer series TV adaptation, because there's so much meat in the books that that doesn't get kind of touched on in the original anime. So yeah, so again, it's one on your list as well. So yeah, if you could maybe talk a bit about why it's
Yeah,
on your list too. Yeah,
I I read this several years ago. I can't
yeah,
recall. It's been a while, and yeah, I was a huge fan of Studio Ghibli, and the movie Nazca: The Valley of the Wind was one of my favorites. And I had never realized that while Miyazaki wanted to do animation the whole time, he needed some respect, he needed some experience, and so he did this as a manga. And kind of this is like what kicks off Studio Ghibli, I believe,
yeah,
if my history is correct. And so you basically have this manga to thank for all the fantastic Miyazaki movies that he's produced over the years. And it is a I've said that the other ones are like sprawling adventures. This one is like it's a complete epic. You
yes,
follow a huge cast of characters. It's a revolving door of new characters. It's unlike a lot of manga in the sense that it's not decompressed. It's actually very dense.
yeah,
It's probably half the length to some of the stuff I've already talked about, but it's so dense it might have taken me longer to read it.
yes,
And just so much occurs. And just like Akira, it's vastly different from the movie. Both are great, but it's just a completely different thing. Obviously, if I had to pick one, I would pick the manga. It's longer. It's got
yeah.
more to it. It's more complex. Yeah, and I mean the art. I won't even. It's
Yeah, obviously
Miyazaki drawing.
Miyazaki,
Yeah,
of course. Yeah. Kind of the other thing I would say, kind of about Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, is I really truly believe it's one of the finest fantasy stories ever told, and I think it's such a shame it's not kind of held up in like the same breath as things like Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones or those sort of stories. I really, it's kind of it was like it just it was so influential on kind of on my view on what kind of was creatively possible in comic books and in manga storytelling, and kind of like the type of ideas and the type of characters, because Nausicaa herself is just such a fantastic um,
oh yeah.
protagonist, kind of like one of the all-time great fantasy heroines in literature, really. So, and they, they've got some superb villains who are well rounded and well written. You kind of understand their motivation for doing the horrible, terrible, awful, no good, very bad things that they do. But yeah, it's a superb epic, and if you've not read it, really do genuinely check it out.
Yeah, there's a giant slipcase edition that has the whole story, and I would recommend it. It's so beautiful on the shelf, and it's like absolute classic in terms of manga and just storytelling in general. He's right. If they made this into a 1 or 2 season animated show, I think it would be held in as high of regard in anime as Game of Thrones is held in regard in
Yeah,
American TV. It's
yeah.
just that good.
I mean, in terms of like TV storytelling, the closest thing in tone for me is probably Avatar. The Last Airbender. It's kind of got that same kind of like sweeping it, but I think it's a lot darker than that at the same time. So yeah, it's kind of one of my all time favorite stories.
I think it's a little
What's
less meandering as well than Avatar,
yes,
which
yeah,
Avatar's good for that. Like it's a good thing about the show, but this one's a little bit more. We stay on plot,
yes,
on the main plot.
yeah.
Yeah,
So I think it's your. I think that was
yeah,
both on both our lists, wasn't it? So
yeah. We doubled up. So,
yeah. What's the next one on yours?
so I think this is my last one because
Yeah,
we've been doubling up
yeah,
so
yeah,
much. Um, I put Berserk, which I mean, all
Okay.
my answers are pretty basic. Like
Yeah.
this is just typical stuff that made it to America that I've heard about, but I love it all. And um, Kentaro Miura is one of the most amazing artists that's ever put pencil to paper. And unfortunately, he did pass away a year ago or so. So the Berserk will probably not be finished, and if it is, it's probably not by him, but one of his assistants. And I'm not going to chime in on that because there's a hot debate going on about that.
Yeah.
But it is, I mean, it's a dark, I think there's a lot of dark fantasy in manga. Wow. It's a very dark, like hyper violent and fairly sexual fantasy book that goes on for longer than any of the books I've talked about. I think there's going to be like 11 giant deluxe edition that come out, and those things are like 1,500 pages a piece or something. And yeah,
Wow. Yeah.
it is
Yeah.
huge. I mean, this
Yeah.
is like 20 or 30 years of the guy's life, I
Yeah.
think. Um, and so actually, I could check that. It is 89 until he died, which was like 20 or 21, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say anything about the story because everyone's heard about Berserk and there's a lot of twists I don't want to spoil, but
Yeah.
you're basically in it for the art and like the insanely dark rated R. I repeat that story.
Yeah.
If you just look up Kentaro Miura Berserk and look at some of his art, you'll see like why it's worth reading. It's very, very great to look at.
So again, I think this is a manga that my younger brother read. I always found it quite intimidating because I just when I look at a lot of manga, I just think, well, there's like 13 volumes, and it just seems like a massive investment of time, and
Yeah.
kind of like I'm very worried about if I won't get something when I'm reading these kind of like massive texts. But I think a lot of people do talk about how it is kind of one of the one of the great mangas, and one of the, actually, in terms of like its influence on other creators, how important it is in kind of saying in terms of both the art style and the kind of the way it kind of the scope of the story as well. I think was has been kind of held up as well. And yeah, there's been a few anime adaptations as well, and I always got confused about where I should start and all that sort of stuff as well.
Yeah, I actually first got into it. There was like some Netflix animated movies, 3 of them.
Yeah.
Covers like the first 3. It probably covers the first 10 volumes, if I'm being honest.
Yeah.
And they are in that like new cell shaded animation style, like very digital.
Yeah.
So it's a little hard to watch for me. I'm not a huge fan of that.
Yeah.
But the story is great. And yeah, it influenced so many things that I love. Like, I don't know if you play a lot of video games, but From Software makes the Dark Souls games.
Yes.
And,
yeah. The oversized swords and the
yeah.
ultra bloody action. Yeah.
They're highly influenced. Yeah. Hidetaka Miyazaki, who makes those games, is just a huge fan of Berserk, and there's tons of Easter eggs. And I feel like a lot more stuff than we give credit to was influenced by Berserk. And yeah, it's definitely one of the all-time greats, even if it never finishes.
Yes. Yeah. And that's kind of it's such a shame, kind of like this and maybe Game of Thrones will maybe remain unfinished, and we just have to maybe write our own fan fiction.
Yep, I was just comparing those two in my head. Yep.
Yeah. So my last one is actually a bit of a cheat because it was published in 2015. It's Dream Fossil. It's the complete stories of Satoshi Kon. So it's a collection of short stories that were published and written and illustrated before 2000, but this collection was only published in 2015. So I'm kind of like
that counts.
fudging the rules really, and it features 16 short stories, including his award-winning debut Torika, and it's fascinating when you kind of I don't know if you're a big fan of like Satoshi Kon's like films, but he's a superb filmmaker whose visuals and ideas and themes have been kind of slavishly copied. Well, slavishly is the wrong word, but kind of like blatantly copied by Western cinema, and you can just see kind of elements from his visuals popping up in lots of like Western movies as well. And I'm rambling. It's fascinating to see how the same themes crop up again and again in his stories and his films, and how there's that kind of early obsession with the idea of identity and um, reality versus fantasy, and the idea of there being this ideal future or a goal that one needs to achieve, and how kind of sometimes that can be a little bit of a poisoned chalice. Me for personally, when I was growing up as a kind of a young adult teenager, I really loved like short story collections, and especially kind of sci-fi fantasy short stories. Kind of my favorite things to read. So just coming across this collection of short story. But short stories by Satoshi Kon it was that his art is so beautiful, and he's just got a master of framing, and he writes really great characters, really interesting dialogue. So yeah, it's a superb collection of short stories by kind of one of the most preeminent voices in anime and filmmaking history, really. So yeah, so that's my last pick.
I had never even heard his name, and I'm looking at some art right now, and it is gorgeous.
Yeah. He's made some of my some of the best films kind of ever made. He's so influential on cinema, and he's written a few mangas as well. I think I was debating whether putting on his long form manga Opus. I'm sure I've read it. But I can't remember a thing about it. And when I was reading like the Wikipedia entries, it's like, I'm sure I've read this. I don't remember like anything described in this Wikipedia entry, so that's kind of why I kind of left it off, really. So yeah,
this is the kind of thing that I will have on my shelf within a few months now, and I will be talking about it again.
Yeah, so it's a really good short story collection. There's kind of like lots of interesting ideas in there as well.
Awesome. I think that's all 5 from each of us.
Cool. Great.
That was fun. We need to do maybe not lists more, but branch out a bit more into some stuff.
Yeah.
This is fun to do.
Yeah, that's great.
Thanks for listening, guys. If you enjoyed this, please check out See-Through Panel on Instagram. Check out our tip jar. We're going to have links for that stuff in the description of wherever you're listening to this. We really appreciate you watching.
Yeah, and if you've got any comments, suggestions, or complaints, please email Cole at see-throughpanel@gmail.com.
Mostly complaints is what that's for. I need to put some extra spam filters on there.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, cheers, guys. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks.